G'day. G'day guys, how are you going? It has been a while since I last said it has been a while, but anyway, today we are having a look at, of course, the Mauerbrecher, or however you pronounce it. It is the VK 168.01. I'm pretty sure all these German tanks have way too long of names, so it is pretty much the only Tier 8 premium super heavy. Of course, there is the KV5, but to call the KV5 a super heavy when you compare it to literally a super heavy is pretty sad, I would say. But anyway, today we're going to go through the history of the Mauerbrecher, and I promise you that I'm not going to make this one up like Wargaming did earlier anyway. And then we're going to go through its top three, its bottom three quirks. We're going to give it a brand score, going through all of its features, I suppose, and then we're going to compare it to other tanks in similar, or in the brand score ranking, I suppose. And then we're going to have a look at some gameplay, and I'm going to finish on my final thoughts on this tank and whether or not you guys should pick this tank up when it hits the stores incredibly soon. And before we get too far into the video, I do have a survey which I would really appreciate if you guys could fill out. It is for a university project. I did post on Reddit and all these places and got a few responses, but I'd really appreciate if you guys could take literally 30 seconds of your time to fill it out as well. It is in the link down below, so please do check that out. So as always, let's start off with the history of this tank. Now, the tank was actually supposed to be used to defend Berlin in April to May of 1945, but during transportation along the street, because of such a large mass, the tank fell through the ground of a tunnel of the Berlin Underground, and I'm just kidding, because that's what Wargaming wants you to think. They did change their story, though. Hopefully this one's true. Let's get into the real history. So, in the summer of 1942, Porsche received an order for a breakthrough vehicle with the most powerful armament and thickest armor possible for such a class. The VK 168.01, which of course here is the Mauerbrecher, or however you pronounce it, was a further development of the Mäuschen project. That is, of course, at Tier 9, that Tier 9 super heavy tank. Now, the main difference was really only the frontal placement of the turret. Otherwise, they were pretty much exactly the same, and it existed only in blueprints. Now on to the top three and the bottom three quirks of this tank. So first of all, it has very thick armor on the tank. Like, I'm talking 250 millimeters on the front of this tank. It is insanely well armored. Of course, once you take into account the weak spots, it becomes less well armored, but just let's pretend for now that it's very strongly armored. Also, it has a very large caliber gun, meaning it has very high alpha damage shots, which is really good for a peekaboo in this tank, which this tank really does excel at. And also, it has a fantastic base view range of 400 meters, which is absolutely absurd. This thing can see further than some light tanks, so that's pretty cool as well. Now, the bottom three quirks of this tank is that this thing is so damn slow to move, although the acceleration is actually quite surprising. If you guys looked at the original stats of this, it showed about a 4.68, I think, horsepower to ton, and now it's up there in just below 10, so that is really fantastic that it was buffed. But also, it's got quite low ground resistances, so although it is slow at 20 kilometers per hour, it actually does get to 20 kilometers per hour pretty easily. Now, also, it has the huge weak spots, which is what I just said before. If we have a look at the front of the tank, we can see this weak spot just over here. I'm looking through a thing, yeah, just over here, also at the top here and at the bottom plate there. So from the front, this thing is actually very much a target for most Tier 8 for sure. Any Tier 9 and of course Tier 10 tanks will be able to go through, not this upper plate here, or even the armor very easily, but if they shoot the turret cheeks, etc., they'll be able to go through. But we'll get onto that anyway very soon as well. And also has very poor DPM. It is very low as a tank, but I mean, you can't expect the world from a tank. If it has high DPM and it's got a very high amount of armor, then it suddenly becomes the mouse, and nobody wants another mouse at Tier 8 really. So this tank is actually relatively, and I'm going to bite my tongue here, but it is relatively well balanced. Of course, that's up to you to decide as well. I'm not the pro at this game, but I think it actually isn't too badly balanced at all. Now let's get onto the brand score of this tank. So the DPM of this tank is 1760, giving it a 5 out of 10, and this is actually not incredibly terrible, but it certainly is down there at the bottom of all Tier 8 premium tanks especially. Penetration wise, the penetration of this tank is pretty surprisingly good at 220 millimeters, and that gives this tank a 6 out of 10. Of course, that is with its standard rounds. Gun handling wise, the shown dispersion value of this tank is quite poor at 0.4 meters per 100 meters, is it? Giving it a 3 out of 5, whilst the hidden dispersion value average is also pretty poor at 0.226, giving it a 3 out of 5. However, you can equip vertical stabilizer on this tank, and that will reduce it by, I think, what, 20 or 25%. So that is something I do recommend. Now, the aiming time of this tank is 2.7 seconds, which is not too bad, actually, giving it a 6 out of 10. Gun vertical movement wise, the gun depression of this tank is 8 degrees, giving it a 3 out of 5, whilst the gun elevation of this tank is actually surprisingly good at 25 degrees, giving this tank another 3 out of 5. Survivability wise, while this tank has very thick armor, it can be very frustrating to play. So let's have a look at its armor schematic viewer right now, and I'll show you just why this tank can be so frustrating. So guys, if we do have a look at its live model, or not the live model, but the collision model anyway, we can see that on the frontal plate, if you even not angling at all, it still has very strong frontal armor. This is to be expected as a German super heavy, so we do expect that as well. If you angle, you can get some pretty insane values on the sides, on the front, everywhere. But you can see these spots here. Let's start at the bottom here. The lower frontal plate is very poorly armored, meaning that you can go through it with relative ease at tier 9 and tier 10 anyway. Tier 8, tier 7, tier 6 are all going to struggle again. And if you're shooting at this tank in a tier 6, good luck. You know, just don't even try, all right? Not from the front anyway. But then if we have a look at this giant machine gun hatch here, or port, we can see that it is very, very poorly armored. It is effectively flat. And if you shoot at it, anything with 140 to, you know, you have to be pretty unlucky at 180. If you shoot at 140, 160, you can go through it. 140 is pushing it, but 160, you have a very likely chance of going through it. And that is something to be worried about, especially if you're driving this tank. So I do recommend pretty much always and exclusively side scraping in this tank if you are coming up against a whole bunch of enemies. But even then, have a look at the top. This is the cupola here, and it is very poorly armored as well. It's huge. And also, it's about 150 millimeters if you shoot at it, and any tank can really go through that. Tier 6, Tier 7, Tier 8, Tier 9, Tier 10, of course. Tier 6, again, they might struggle, but Tier 7, Tier 8 should have pretty much no issues going through these two weak spots here. Otherwise, it's really to be expected, guys. The turret cheeks are also kind of weak, so Tier 9s and Tier 10s will be able to go through this very easily. They'll shoot straight at your turret cheeks and go through. It's about 230 millimeters. Having said that, if you keep it angled like this, you are able to block a majority of shots. However, it's really hard to keep this properly angled, so you might want to keep the tank angled at this kind of angle. And if you can, try and side scrape the other way, so that way you expose your cupola and your possibly your machine gun port a lot less. Because if you can imagine, if you put up a little line there, you can see that you can cover at least the machine gun hatch, but you can't really cover that cupola. That's so hard because it's so huge as well. So overall, guys, with all that in mind, I'm giving this tank an 8 out of 10 for survivability, because of course it does have very good armor, especially for its tier, but these weak spots, which I'm not actually against. Of course, we've been asking for weak spots. Yes, this tank probably isn't as strong from the front as a defender, but this tank still has very, very good armor indeed, and these weak spots give people the opportunity to be able to take it out as long as they know the game and are skillful. So for that reason, I'm giving this tank an 8 out of 10 for survivability. Now, mobility-wise, the power-to-weight ratio of this tank is 9.52 horsepower to ton, and although that is quite slow, it's a lot better than what it was at 4.6 something, so that gives this tank a 2 out of 5, and the average traverse speed is very poor at 16.5 degrees per second, giving it a 1 out of 5. 16.5 degrees per second, that must be the worst at tier 8. Possibly tier 9 and tier 10. Like, that is so slow, but it's to be expected. This thing is a super heavy. Now, view range wise, as I said earlier, the view range of this tank is 400 meters, and that gives this tank a 9 out of 10. That really does beat some light tanks. That is very impressive. Concealment while stationary, or the camouflage value, it's really a joke in this kind of sense, but the camouflage value of this tank while not firing the gun or moving is only 3.48%, giving it a 2 out of 10. So often, even with that amazing view range, even if you put on, for example, coated optics, it's still going to lead to you being effectively spotted before you can spot anyone else and getting shot at. So that is something to keep in mind as well. Often tanks will be able to see you before you can see them, just because it is so huge and has such a low camouflage value. Now, value-wise for this tank, I personally think that this tank is not really a great tank to play in general. It is hard to play. It's incredibly situational. Like, it will only really ever succeed in towns, in places where there are lots of shelter and you can hide from artillery. This thing is an artillery magnet. They love love this tank, and that's something to keep in mind as well. So on paper it does seem like an amazing breakthrough tank, and it is a pretty amazing breakthrough tank, but that is only in certain situations. So that is something you really need to keep in mind, because otherwise this tank does feel like it's just a huge pain in the ass. So I'm giving this tank a 6 out of 10. I'm going to pick one up just for the novelty of it. It isn't a bad tank, don't get me wrong. I actually think it's very well balanced for what it is, but even so, it's just so frustrating to play sometimes. If you're on a desert map, good luck. This tank is, you kind of just want to leave the match. So this tank isn't something that is very versatile at all. It is very specific, and you need it for a specific purpose in only certain games. So keep that in mind if you do want to pick this tank up. So overall, yeah, 6 out of 10 for this one. And thus, guys, the final brand score for this tank is 57 out of 100. Here it is, compared to other tanks close to it in the brand score list. You can check this out yourself at heavilyarmored.com. Super easy to check out. But overall, guys, I mean, it places pretty averagely. This is really a measure of overpoweredness to tier. So really, overpoweredness to tier, this tank does actually do pretty well, and it sits well within its tier. So guys, let's look at some gameplay, and you'll see just how this tank performs in game. So guys, here we are on Mauerbrecher today. Of course we are in the Mauerbrecher. I don't know why I'm even saying that, but it is a new tank. Oh my god, I can't hear a thing. Give me one sec. Oh, that's so much better. Everyone was going crazy in the chat, to be expected. It happened in most games that have played so far in this tank. You can see though that it is absolutely massive. It's huge. It feels like you are playing a mouse. I didn't even see that guy behind me. I was pushing him. This guy was pretty annoying. It's just in my way, but that's alright. He was just having a nice little squeeze. I wanted to try and get a shot off at that Hellcat, because I have been able to snap a surprising amount of shots, but unfortunately I didn't quite get the shot in, which is bad timing, because I probably would have been able to get that Cromwell, but that's alright. Who cares anyway? So we are top tier, of course, and that makes the enemy team in for a real treat when they come up against this tank, because this tank is just so nasty. But you can see as well that it actually doesn't struggle to reach its top speed. It's also got a pretty fast reverse speed of 15 kilometers per hour. That was pretty surprising to me as well. But it reaches that 20 kilometers per hour very, very quickly, so it can sustain the 20 kilometers per hour without too many issues, because of course it does have some pretty good soft stats as well. Of course, the soft stats being stats you can't see, but which make the tank better or worse in whichever way. So in this case, it makes the tank a lot better when you compare it to its counterparts. So I decided to move away from there, because it's just not, there's no point in me sitting back. I'm a top tier heavy, super heavy tank, and I'm a breakthrough tank, so I might as well just go up and scare the bejesus out of the enemy team, who A, won't know where to fire at this tank, because they've probably never seen it before, or they don't know much about it, and also just to put pressure on them to win. It does feel kind of unfair in this kind of situation, being top tier in this tank, because if it's top tier, it's way too powerful. If it's bottom tier, it's usually not powerful enough. And that was something actually when I spoke to developers in Minsk, Belarus, they said was a real issue with this tank, and why they weren't going to release it anytime soon, but I guess they've changed their minds on that one. Now look at that. I've had so many of those kind of shots where it just fires and hits them straight. Easy, no issues at all in this tank. I really haven't had that many kind of accuracy issues in this tank, which is very surprising. You can see I'm just getting bounce after bounce. I bounced off that 112, probably went straight into his tracks, but that's alright, I don't really mind. That AMX M445 is scared to push out. The 112 shoots me with heat, but he's going to struggle as well. So there we go, we get another shot, that AMX M445. You see just how high the damage roll of this tank is. And that is like a pretty good thing about this tank, even though it does have low DPM. That high, alpha damage means that this tank is awesome for Pika booming, which is what this tank really wants to do. I decided to go for that KV85 so I can try and destroy him, but I didn't quite take him out either. So there we have the 112, and he's now on his own up here, because our team was able to push up pretty successfully. I think at this point he kind of just gives up. I shoot him in the front, and then I decide to just go for the ram, see if I can do any more damage, which I don't think I did, but I get at least more tracking damage, so I'm happy with that. So far guys, we are at 1846 damage, 936 spotting damage, just like that. We haven't really had any issues against the enemy team, so I mean, you can see that this tank, when it's top tier, is a real bully. I don't really have many tier 10 kind of gameplays because I did so badly in them. There's just no point in me showing them to you, but this tank really does struggle at tier 10, especially when people know the weaknesses of tanks, the general weaknesses, like the good old days when the Commander's Hatch was a weakness. Some tanks it's not, but they brought it back in this tank, so if you fire at the cupola on this tank, it will go straight through. If you fire at the machine gun board, it will go straight through. Fire at the lower plate, it is probably going to go through as well, so that's something to keep in mind as well. For all you seasoned players out there, this tank does have real weak spots, as we did see in the armor schematic viewer as well. And here you can see that this is where the top speed limit really does piss you off. Lost my train of thought. Oh, I think I was talking about this top speed limit. The top speed limit of this tank, you can see it is really annoying at this point. There comes the accuracy for you. I suppose any sort of long distance shot, it really doesn't. It really does not like those. But yeah, going down the hill, you're only going 22 kilometers per hour. It feels like you're driving a T95 at T9, and even that now probably goes a bit faster than this tank in a straight line. So that's a bit frustrating. Another shot that goes straight through. RNGesus. Bless your fam. I appreciate you. From your royal thickness, I appreciate you. Here's another shot, which is just pretty unbelievable as well. Straight into the back of him. Kind of went straight to where I wanted it to go as well. And the shell velocity as well, something I should mention, isn't all that bad either. So far, guys, though, look how much damage I've picked up. 2,946 damage done, 1,750 damage blocked, and 1,000 spotting damage. And I've barely done anything. I've pretty much just driven it around the usual straight kind of line area. I realize I can't grab that Hummel, so I might as well get more distance in this tank. I don't know if it helps WN8 or anything like that, but maybe it does. I'm not 100% sure. And there we have it. That is the end of the game. Was it that exciting? Not really, but this is like the majority of replays that you'll have in this kind of tank, or games that you'll have in this kind of tank. That's just what it does. It's a slow, super heavy tank. I like the way it plays. A lot of people, a lot of the other community contributors I've talked to really, really hate this tank and have very low win rates after about 30 games or so. I'm not even sure what my win rate is at the moment, but I'm sure it's not that great either. But so far, guys, I've got to be honest, I have been enjoying this tank. It does definitely have its flaws. It is very slow, but it's also got its strengths, and a lot of people might say that they're very overpowered. I don't think so. I think if you're a good player, you'll know where to aim on this tank and you know its weaknesses. It's very slow. It's very slow to turn, very slow to move. It'll be outflanked like crazy. It really is the epitome of super heavy, and that's kind of like the T92 light tank. That really is the epitome of light tanks, and I have to admit I was probably wrong about how bad that tank was. Don't get me wrong, it's really not a great tank, but it really does epitomize what Wargaming want a light tank to be, and this super heavy here really also does epitomize what Wargaming wants a super heavy to be. And who knows, I think they are planning to introduce some sort of super heavy class relatively soon anyway, so I guess this would fit into it. Enough dribbling on, let's have a look at the post-game stats so we can see just how well I, Matt Brand, did in this tank. So I've had to use a different website here. This is What Record by Aging Jedi, a community contributor in EU. So hello, if you're watching this, I really highly doubt you are. I don't think many people will be watching this one. But anyway, I got a Mastery Badge 3rd class, which I was actually pretty surprised about. I thought I would have done better than that, but apparently not. I mean, to be fair, I'm versing all the Super Unicums playing this tank, so I guess it shouldn't be too surprising. In the tank, I did 2,946 damage, by far the most on my team, by far the most even on the enemy team. And in that, I did, out of the 10 shots I fired, 8 hit and 7 penetrated. Who did I bounce off? Oh, yes, I went into the track of that 112. I did 672 damage from over 300 meters, which is pretty impressive, but you can see that the majority of the damage I did was from close up, and that is to be expected. It is a super heavy, slow tank. That's what it's for. I blocked 1,750 damage points, which I'm pretty happy and stoked about, and overall I earned 863 experience points for that as well. And also I actually made a pretty decent profit on this tank of 80,765, and as you could see, I didn't play amazingly well. Don't think that this tank is incredibly, I guess, cheap to play. The ammunition does cost quite a lot, as you can see. I don't think I fired any premium rounds, and already I lost 10,700 credits. Maybe I did, I don't really remember. You guys can tell me, but yeah, I mean, it's not terribly that's not terrible at all at making credits. In fact, of course, as a premium, it does make credits, and that's pretty cool as well. But enough dribbling on. I keep doing that. Let's just go, and I'll give you my final thoughts on this tank and whether or not you guys should go ahead and buy this tank when it comes out. I'm presuming very, very soon. So guys, what are my final thoughts on this tank, and should you pick up this tank? Is it worth the gold? Well, it's been really hard to tell with this one. It's very much been an emotional roller coaster for myself, because honestly, it feels really well balanced. Like, genuinely, it feels very well balanced. Yes, it does have insane armor, and yes, the gun does have high DPM, but to counter that, it's got weak spots, and to counter that gun, it's got low DPM, so that's something to keep in mind as well. Also, the dispersion is pretty shocking at any sort of long range. So overall, I think this tank is actually pretty well balanced. You guys can disagree with me, and if you do, please leave it down in the comments section below. But to be fair, I've been thinking as well, this tank feels like it was really well balanced as if it was for 2 years ago, but when it goes up against things like the Defender, like even the Patriot, or the Scorpion, this thing can really struggle. The STR VS1, it can go straight through the cheeks of this tank. It can go through a lot of the front of this tank, and that's pretty scary. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But I genuinely think if you're looking for a novel tank, if you're looking for a tank to train your heavy crews from the German lines, this is probably the way to go. I think it's pretty good in those senses, and I'm going to be picking one up myself. But you guys know your own wallets. If you want to pick one up, it's completely up to you. But anyway, guys, thank you so very much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe if you're new. It always helps me out. It makes me feel very happy indeed watching that subscriber count grow, because it means that I might be doing something right in my life. But anyway, I'll catch you next time.